Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I thought I would pop in with a video on this book titled Edmond and Jules de Goncourt. And this is volume 1 of 2. I bought the 2 volumes as a set, and as you can see, I found some interesting things in here. But it's not actually the book that I thought I was ordering. It's not what I thought I was ordering at all. I thought that what I had selected was perhaps an edited or an abridgment of the journals that these 2 brothers kept throughout several years of their lives in the 19th century. That's not what this is. And I'm going to read the title to you, and you'll see why I was a little bit misled by the seller's description. And so the title of this book is Edmond and Jules de Goncourt, with letters and leaves from their journals. Compiled and translated by M.A. Belloc and M. Shedlock. And so, by that title, I thought what I was getting was, some of their letters and a selection of their journals. Not what this is at all. This is actually a 2-volume biography of the brothers, which, is fine. It showed up, and I took a look and decided this is something I'm interested in anyway, and if I had known about its existence, in complementary to the journals themselves I wanted to read, I probably would have bought this as well. So I didn't put in any complaints. I didn't complain. I just decided, it was a surprise. And I'm happy with it anyway, and I've started to read it. And I think the Goncourts are lesser known literary figures, at least in the English-speaking world. I had never heard of them until just a couple of months ago when I was reading a book on journals. It was specifically, essays and selections from various literary journals. Important literary journals, and Jules and Edward Goncourt came up, and apparently they held, a literary salon in Paris for many years, and they kind of held court over this literary world. They wrote most of their things together, at least up until the point when Jules died, unfortunately, at a young age. I'm not quite sure what he died of yet, because I'm not that far into the biography. But so far, their literary breadth is very wide. They start off by attempting to write a play, which does not get performed. Then they switch over to novels. Their first novel is indeed published, and I've got a sticky note here just to reference some interesting passages here. Let me make sure I've got the correct one here. And so their first novel is called En, so En, En 18, so En 18. There's not really a description too much of what this novel is about, but they came into, some horrible bad luck in their early days of trying to publish things. When it came to their first play, the real issue that prevented that from being, performed was that just by coincidence, somebody else had written a play with a similar plot or similar subject matter that began performance, just a few weeks after they'd completed writing their play. And so naturally, they couldn't put that onto the stage then, because there would be accusations of plagiarism. So they had horrible luck with that play. And then they write their novel, En 18, and they are very excited because it's going to be published on the 2nd of December, 1851. And it says, and I'm assuming this is probably a quote from the journals themselves, which I'm still going to acquire a copy of if I can. But here it says, on the 1st of December, we went to bed, my brother and I, in the happy state of mind common to young authors, who await the coming morning in order to see their first volume on sale in every bookseller's shop. We were dreaming of editions, numberless editions, when suddenly, after a loud knocking on the door, in rushed our cousin Belmont, once a National Guard, but now a grey-haired, asthmatical, violent old conservative. "Good God, it's come upon us," he exclaimed. "What has? The coup d'etat, the devil, and our novel, which was to be put out on sale today." "Your novel? A novel? Ah, my fine fellows, France won't trouble herself much about novels today." And with a gesture peculiar to himself, he buttoned up his coat as tightly as if he had been drawing up a sword belt, took a brief leave of us, and went off to carry the triumphant news from the district of Notre Dame to Lorette to his acquaintances, then scarcely out of their beds in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. And so they end up, going out still, and they're hoping to see these big posters pasted everywhere that were meant to be put out by the publisher to advertise their new novel. And they don't see the posters anywhere, and it turns out in a moment of panic, their publisher has destroyed all the posters because something related to the title of the novel, the publisher was concerned it would be, taken the wrong way by authority figures. And so their novel comes out with horrible timing and really no publicity. And this gets into a little interesting fact as well about the first editions of that book and collectors of those editions. So only about 60 volumes of their first novel were ever, given away or went out into circulation, sold. Most of them were presentation copies they gave to critics and friends and whatnot. And it says here, and I think there is, I've got another sticky note here. The remainder were piled up in a garret and forgotten till many years later, when Jules and Edmond, while searching for a book they were in need of, came upon the heap of old volumes and began glancing through the already forgotten pages. Finding the work childish, feeble, and incomplete, they deliberately burnt every copy. And this is why the first edition of En 18 has become one of the literary rarities of the century, for the French bibliomaniac who possesses this shabby little book in his library can indeed boast of a treasure. And so that was their first foray into novel writing. But they don't leave it at plays and novel writing. I think it's Jules who dabbles in poetry a little bit. They go on to attempt a few more plays. And they begin to write regularly for a weekly literary journal, which actually gets them into a little bit of legal trouble over some, indecent and immoral poetry that they reproduce as a quote in one of their articles. They end up going to court. The first judge, they realize, is going to come down rather hard on them, but there is a delay in the proceedings, and they get a new judge who kind of lets them off with a warning and suggests that they don't write for publications anymore and don't engage in journalism. They ignore that advice, but they write with a little bit more caution in the future. And I believe that publication was just called Paris, or the Paris, and it was, as they believed, the first literary journal of its kind. And they have, illustrators and other writers who are contributing to it. And but then they branch out from those things into history. And I'm looking for my next sticky note here that mentions the name of that work. Histoire de la société pendant la Révolution. And so it's essentially a work of history that they write on the French Revolution. And by the French Revolution, that's in reference to the earlier one that took place at the end of the 18th century, so the end of the previous century. So they weren't alive during that revolution, but they managed to write, this landmark work that's greatly detailed. I think it says here they started out writing a pamphlet or something, and it sort of grew and ballooned, and they spent weeks and months focused on writing this history and holed up in libraries, and they put this book out, and it's very well received, and they go on to write some additional pamphlets in history. And where I'm at right now, they are just about to set out on a tour of Italy. So a little bit of biographical background on these two. They are from a noble family. I think it was their father or their grandfather supported Napoleon Bonaparte. what put them a bit at odds, of course, when Napoleon was out and someone new was in. And they grew up, in wealth. And there's 8 years between the two brothers. Jules is the younger of the two brothers. But unfortunately, their father died when they were quite young, and they were raised for the most part by their mother. And then once again, their mother died when they were quite young, not long after Edwin had come of age. And Edwin had, at the request of his mother, he had been set up in a government office. He had a ministerial position of some sort. Not ministerial, but he had a position in one of the ministries. He was not a minister, I should clarify there. He had a position with the government. I think it was finance, with the finance or something. And he was going to sort of eke away his existence, working on his literary stuff in the spare time. But then their mother died, and she left them, as the author says, she left them orphans. They were left orphans. And at that point in time, they inherited a little bit of money, enough for them to decide to devote, a few months of their time to travel. And I'm going to search for another sticky note here because, they wanted to go to Italy, but political events in Italy kept them from traveling there. And so they traveled through the south of France and into Africa. And Algiers. They spent some time living in Algiers. And there's a line here from one of their journals. They said, Paris, the city of the world, Algiers, the city of the artist. And apparently they liked Algiers so much that they thought about permanently settling down there and living there. But of course, they departed there to go back to Paris as planned at the end of their journey, the end of their time away. And I guess, they were taken up with the charms of Paris again and did not return to Algiers to live. And so, they've got the means and the fortune to actually sit down and write and work things out and build this career. And here, let me just make sure I'm quoting the correct brother here. It's Jules writing to a friend of his, Louis Passy. He says, whatever happens, we can claim an ample provision of energy, of resignation, and of activity. It is only by knocking often that one ends by getting in. And so he's acknowledging here, they might not get that, literary success on the first try. And this is after their attempt to publish, or rather get that play put on. But they're going to keep knocking on the door in the hopes that they'll eventually be let in to this circle of published authors, to this literary elite. And by the point where I've left them here on page 82, when they're about to head out for that Italian journey that they didn't get to take a few years ago. And this is in, I think this is 1855 we're looking at now. November of 1855 when they set out for Italy. At this point, they have established themselves in some capacity in the literary world, and they have started their weekly gatherings, their weekly salon, if you will. I don't think they actually call it a salon here, but they do have these gatherings at a set time on a set day of the week that apparently went on for years and years, right up to the time when Jules passes away. And I'll be interested to see what their observations on Italy are. I would hope that, when I do obtain the actual journals in some format, it will include, the full journals from their time in Italy. Apparently on their previous trip through the south of France, their journals were rather sparse. And, for two people who are aspiring to be, men of literature, to be authors, apparently they were very, very sparse with their travel journal keeping on their first trip. Because I guess the one brother, took down the names of the towns they passed through and the distances traveled. and didn't really have much to say about what they saw or experienced, which is what you would expect from a good travel journal. And the names and distances traveled aren't really going to be of interest to anyone. But I'm quite pleased with this biography so far. As I said, not what I thought I was ordering, but a pleasant surprise all the same. And it's possible the bookseller didn't even realize that this was, a deceptive listing, because, it was the correct title of the book that was listed on the site. It led me to believe I was getting journal excerpts and letters. And actually, it's interesting because nowhere on here does it say biography or a life at all. There's nothing to indicate that it's a biography. It's not until you get into the preface that it says this book proposes to give an account of the life and the work of Edmond and Jules de Goncourt, brothers who achieved a rare literary partnership and who have remained closely associated in the mind and judgment of the public. And it says the younger at the time of publication, and this is 1895, the younger has lain in the grave for nearly a quarter of a century. And I'm quite enjoying it, and so the plan is to read through the 2 volumes of the biography, get my hands on the letters, and then I'll see what else is available in translation, and determine, whether their histories, their novels, or anything like that is worth reading in translation, if it's even available, because as I said, the Goncourt brothers don't really seem to have made as big a splash as some of their other contemporaries have in terms of translated into English literature. But I'll leave it at that for now. See you all again soon.